This severely constrained the nature of the route flown by the bombers. In effect, this meant flying a straight line to the target, thus helping the RAF marshal its fighters more effectively to combat the incoming raid. By September, the Jagdflieger had lost the freedom of action to attack the RAF fighters in the way that they thought best. From September 20th, the move to shift air raids on England to the night was a virtual acceptance that the attempt to defeat the RAF and achieve air superiority prior to an invasion had failed. In the 4 months of the Battle of Britain, the Luftwaffe had lost a total of 610 Me-109s and very many experienced pilots, whose loss was even more significant. But as a fighter, the Me-Bf 109 had not been found wanting, nor had the pilots that flew them. Goering felt he'd been betrayed by his Luftwaffe, and the Jagdflieger were his scapegoat. On June the 22nd, 1941, 3 million German troops crossed the Soviet frontier in the greatest land invasion in history. The cutting edge of Operation Barbarossa lay in the panzer formations, whose task was to encircle and destroy the bulk of the Red Army before it had time to withdraw from the western frontiers into the depths of the Soviet hinterland. So optimistic was Hitler that the tried and tested blitzkrieg technique would yield success against the Red Army that he anticipated the Eastern campaign being brought to a successful conclusion in just a few months. Crucial to the success of the opening battles at the frontiers was the assumption that even before the end of the first day of the campaign, the Luftwaffe would have established air superiority. The priority task of the 4 Luftwaffe committed to the operation was the destruction of the bulk of the Soviet air force on the ground in the opening hours of the war. To ensure this happened at the same time as the German forces were crossing the frontier, the Luftwaffe arrived over the Soviet airfield at exactly 0330 hours. All combat types, from the 775 level bombers, 310 Stukas, 830 single-engined Me-109s committed to the war in the East, all found themselves dropping vast numbers of small fragmentation bombs. Lines of Soviet aircraft lined up on airfields all over European Russia and the Baltic states. The Soviets were later to admit to 800 aircraft destroyed on the ground and a further 400 shot down in combat by the Luftwaffe on the opening day of the war. German claims, however, ran to 4,000 Soviet aircraft destroyed by the end of June. Subsequently, day fighters were permitted to range freely over Soviet territory, where surviving fighters and bombers of the Red Air Force proved easy prey for the experienced Jagdflieger. Ground strafing of the numerous targets offered by Soviet rail and road traffic also became a common activity when in support of advancing German ground forces. Unlike in the West, where such air attacks forced the enemy to ground, Russian troops often stood and fired back with every weapon they possessed, resulting in mounting German casualties. Although many of the Jagdgruppen were still using the Me-109E, the arrival of the superior Me-109F4 in August confirmed overwhelming German air superiority over the Russian front. The success of the Jagdflieger over Russia can be measured by Mulder's score of 68 on the 22nd of June. In less than a month, he had become the first German pilot ever to down 100 aircraft. Unit scores grew so quickly as those of the individual so-called expert. On the 30th of June, the collective tally of the pilots of JG-51 made them the first German fighter unit in the Luftwaffe to have shot down 1,000 enemy aircraft. Such were the rich pickings in the east that they were followed shortly by JGs 53, 54 and JG-3 in passing the 1,000 mark. Although these scores have often been thought incredible, the superiority of the Jagdflieger in the east in the opening months of the war in Russia was overwhelming. This success can be accounted for by their more effective equipment, the psychological, tactical and technical superiority of German pilots, their high sortie rates from airfields close to the front, and the essentially tactical nature of the Red Air Force. German pilots often commented on the way Soviet pilots provided them with easy targets by seemingly refusing to maneuver when attacked, continuing to fly in a straight line inviting destruction, as witnessed in this gun camera footage showing the downing of an Ilyushin DB-3 bomber by a 109E over Lithuania in August 1941. In the autumn, Goering met high-ranking Luftwaffe staff and chosen fighter commanders in East Prussia. Present was Molders, who was displaying the diamonds to his Knight's Cross, awarded by Hitler on the 16th of July.
Als Flugzeugführer in einem Kampfgeschwader hatte besondere Aufgaben zu erfüllen. In weit über 100 Feindflügen
Witnessed by Odette, Goering presents the Knight's Cross to Airman Rudolf Knacker. Among other fighter commanders present is Volker Uzal of JG-2. Though hardly a stranger to publicity, Adolf Galland is clearly embarrassed by the attention paid to him by the cameraman. Unbeknown to the JG-26 commander, this would be the last occasion on which he would see his friendly rival Molders alive. Although the cameraman is at pains to capture the Reichsmarschall playing the Luftwaffe overlord, Goering's devotion to his other interests was already causing command problems that were to have dire long-term consequences. Following his 115th victory, Goering had promoted Molders to full colonel and appointed him Luftwaffe's Inspector de Jagdflieger, an admin post involving travel to all points where the Jagdverband was operating. Molders gave up command of his beloved JG-51. Highly regarded by Goering and his fellow airmen, Molders was an intelligent, perceptive leader of men whose contribution to the development of fighter tactics in the Luftwaffe played a significant role in its success in the opening years of the conflict. Care for his men had been earlier rewarded with the nickname Vati or Daddy. For the short time he was in post, he was spared the infighting of the Nazi leadership and was thus spared the disillusionment that became the lot of Adolf Galland, his successor. By 1941, the RAF had grown strong enough to embark upon a limited air offensive over France. Two types of ops were flown, both involving attacks on shipping, docks, railway sidings and military bases along the French coastal region to tempt the Luftwaffe into the air. This would then provide the opportunity of defeating German fighter units in combat. The first of these operations was christened Rhubarb, an air sweep over northern France flown by a squadron of fighters. The second and larger of these was named the Circus and involved both bombers and fighters. The core of the operation was provided by a detachment of Bristol Blenheim 4 medium bombers numbering from 25 up to 80. Escort for these was then provided by several squadrons of Hurricanes and Spitfires, amounting to as many as 200 fighters on the bigger Circuses. These had the task of hunting down and destroying the German fighter units as they rose to attack the bait offered by the bombers of the incoming raid. Although still the mainstay of the medium bomber squadrons, the Blenheim was a dated design,